Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to episode 376 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where we look at mysteries from the twin perspectives of faith and reason. In this episode, we're talking about the Hellhouse of Martinez, California. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today is Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to stick around to the end of the episode. We'll have your feedback on our recent episode on St. Malachi's Prophecy of the Popes. But first, in the 1980s, a family of four moved into a brand new house in Martinez, California. But quickly after they moved in, they started noticing strange phenomena. Certain spots in the house somehow felt wrong. They became dizzy, they got headaches, they noticed noxious odors, they saw sparks and flashes of light in the air. They also saw balls of fire appearing inside the house, and these balls of fire left scorch marks where they touched other things. Visitors to the house saw and experienced some of the same disturbances. Worse yet, they had evidence of people in a nearby barn that they suspected were causing these experiences. They then reached out to paranormal investigators to find out what might be going on. So, what was responsible for the phenomena going on in the Hellhouse of Martinez? What could explain them? And what was the shocking truth about these events? That's what we'll be talking about on this episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. So, Jimmy, what do we need to know to begin today's mystery?
Well, today's mystery occurs in Martinez, California, which is a city in the north end of the Bay Area of San Francisco, in what some might consider Northern California, though it's really Middle California. The mystery concerns a family of four who, in the 1980s, moved into a long ranch-style house in Martinez, and they very quickly began noticing all kinds of bizarre phenomena, including fireballs appearing in midair and leaving scorch marks on walls and furniture, which is why I decided to call this episode the Hellhouse of Martinez. They also were aware of other people on the property late at night who they suspected were involved in some of the bizarre phenomena and may have been casting spells or something.
Who will be our guide to the mystery for this episode?
This time I'll be interviewing Lloyd Auerbach, who writes about these events in his book, A Paranormal Casebook, which we'll have a link to so that you can read about it for yourself. Lloyd is a paranormal investigator. He's also a respected figure in the parapsychological community, and he's one of my fellow instructors at the Ryan Education Center, as well as being president of the Ryan Board. He teaches courses about the kind of field investigation that we'll be discussing today, and Lloyd has appeared on Mysterious World before. I interviewed him in episode 210 on the haunted house of Marin County, and he appeared again in episodes 352 and 353 on the community of ghosts that's reported living aboard or not living aboard the USS Hornet.
I understand that there are a few things listeners should know before we get into the interview. One of these deals with the history of paranormal investigations. And what should we know on this topic?
Lloyd briefly mentions a few highlights from history, and paranormal investigations have been conducted for a very long time. For example, we mention how the Greek philosopher Athenodorus, who lived in the 1st century BC, rented a haunted house and conducted an investigation there. And it's a really interesting tale. That's a story that I'll tell in more detail in the future. Lloyd also mentions the Ghost Club, which was founded in London in 1862, and they're still around. They conduct investigations of ghost sightings, and we'll have a link to their website. And Lloyd also mentions the Society for Psychical Research, or SPR. They were founded in 1882, and they have a broader focus than the Ghost Club does. The SPR doesn't do just ghosts. And they helped usher in the scientific study of paranormal phenomena. They're also still around. We'll have a link to their website, and I happen to be a member of the SPR.
I understand you also mentioned a couple of concepts in parapsychology during the interview that you didn't have a chance to stop and define. What are these?
The first is what's known as the RSPK model of poltergeist activity. The term poltergeist is German for noisy ghost, and it applies to cases where there are a range of strange, inexplicable noises like thumps and bangs and objects moving around with no apparent cause. It appears that the term poltergeist was coined by the Protestant reformer Martin Luther, and he thought that poltergeists were all deceptive spirits because because whenever a poltergeist shows up in someone's house, according to Luther, it always wants to have the Catholic Mass said for its soul. But Luther wasn't a fan of the Catholic Mass, so he thought these were evil spirits. In the 20th century, parapsychologists began to suspect that many, although not all, poltergeists actually weren't caused by spirits at all. Instead, they seem to be caused by live-in human beings who are experiencing what's known as recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK. Psychokinesis happens when matter is affected by the mind, like the objects moving around. If it happens without anyone intending it to happen, then it's spontaneous. And if it keeps happening, then it's recurrent, hence recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. Eventually, parapsychologists got evidence that RSPK is the explanation for many poltergeist-like events. And it seems to happen when a person is under a lot of stress and doesn't feel that they can express their frustrations openly. So their subconscious kind of throws a temper tantrum using psychokinesis. At least that's the theory, and helping the person with stress management techniques can actually help the poltergeist phenomena to subside. We introduced poltergeist back in episode 195 on poltergeists themselves. We talked about them again in episode 295 on the Popper poltergeist case that affected a Catholic family in Seaford, New York, and that helped usher in the RSPK theory. And we talked about them in episode 260 on the 21st century poltergeist, where all kinds of electronic devices were being affected. In today's interview, we also talk about what's known as a haunting or a residual haunting. This refers to something that people may perceive as a ghost, but it looks like it's something else. An example of a haunting would be like if every day at midnight you see someone descending a staircase in your house, but that's all it ever does. It just keeps going down the staircase, and that's it. It never talks to anyone. It ignores you if you talk to it, so it's not interactive, and it acts like a recording. And, well, that's what many parapsychologists have concluded such phenomena are. They're recordings or place memories that were laid down by someone when they were alive. So it's not actually a ghost. It's a record that was left by someone when they were alive, and whoever left it may still be alive.
In the interview, you also mentioned a few specific individuals. Who are they?
One is the couple George and Kathy Lutz. They were at the center of the Amityville horror hoax, and it was a hoax. We talked about it in episode 358, so you can listen to that for more information. But when you hear me refer to the Lutzes, that's who we're talking about. Lloyd also mentions the Warrens, and that's a reference to Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed was touted as a demonologist and Lorraine as a psychic. We mentioned them briefly in episode 358 on the Amityville horror, and I'll do a future episode that's devoted just to them. But, spoiler, I do not have a high opinion of them, and you'll see why when we devote a whole episode to them.
Anything else we should be aware of before we listen to the interview?
Just two small things. First, we mentioned that there have been claims and even lawsuits about whether high-tension power lines are linked to cancer. Lloyd alludes to the fact that these claims are controversial, and we'll have a link to where you can read more about that from a source that strikes me as open-minded but honest. However, there can be other problems about living next to such power lines besides cancer. The last thing to be aware of is a 1960s pop culture reference. Back in 1967, British TV creators Jerry and Sylvia Anderson produced a series called Captain Scarlet and the Mysterons. It's a sci-fi series using the Andersons' famous supermarionation techniques, and it features a race from Mars known as the Mysterons. In the series, they use a visual effect that looks like a couple of green glowing circles when the Mysterons are up to no good, so that's what we're referring to at one point in the discussion.
Well, if that's what we need to know, then let's listen to your interview with Loyd Auerbach about the Hellhouse of Martinez. We'd like to take a moment here to thank our patrons who make this show possible, including Christy K., Skylar D., Tony G., Austin L., and Samuel E. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World and all the shows at StarQuest. More than 90% of our financial support comes from individual donors like you. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is also brought to you by DeliverContacts.com, offering top brand contact lenses at always low prices with free delivery. Visit DeliverContacts.com. And by the debut novel Holy Terror by John R. Doherty. Holy Terror is a gripping supernatural thriller where horrific crimes reveal an invisible war between good and evil. As justice is delivered through mysterious, otherworldly means, detectives and agents uncover a force far greater than themselves. Holy Terror is a bold blend of crime, faith, and the paranormal. You can find author John R. Doherty at johnrdoherty.com. And for those who enjoy audiobooks, Holy Terror is also available on audible.com. Subscribers to John's email list can receive a free copy of the Bible Study Guide Companion at authorjohnrdoherty.com/subscribe. You can find both links in the show notes for this episode on our website.
Lloyd Auerbach has a Master of Science degree in parapsychology. He's the director of the Office of Paranormal Investigations, the president of the Forever Family Foundation, and the president of the Rhine Board of Directors. He has been working in parapsychology for over 40 years, focusing on education and field investigations. He's the author or co-author of more than a dozen books and teaches parapsychology courses online through the Rhine Education Center. In addition, he's a professional mentalist and psychic entertainer under the name Professor Paranormal, and he's also a professional chocolatier. Loyd Auerbach, welcome back to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. Always a pleasure.
So tell us, how did you become involved in this case?
I got a phone call. I mean, frankly, this is in the 1980s when, even though our graduate parapsychology program had ended, I was still on faculty and kind of finishing up having an office as a faculty member in Orinda, California, where the university was at the time.
What university was that?
This was John F. Kennedy University. It was a graduate parapsychology program for about 11 years. We were in the School of Consciousness Studies at the time. It's kind of evolved quite a bit, and the university doesn't exist as such. It was purchased by National University and kind of absorbed as part of their graduate school. But I was still teaching courses in parapsychology for the university. And a call came in. It was always being funneled to me or whoever else in the faculty happened to be around. And it was a family living in Martinez, California, who were reporting some unusual stuff. And they were and had an unusual referral, not the usual referrals that we typically get.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
It was referred to us, or they were referred to us by a police officer who happened to know about me and about the parapsychology program. We had a pretty good reputation, and because of publicity for me from Ghostbusters, as it happens, I was pretty well known in the Bay Area.
Okay. What was their living situation at the time? You said they were in Martinez, California, and they had some unusual stuff happen. And I assume that was in their home. What was their home like?
Yeah, so that was in their home. They were leasing this home. It was a relatively new building, new house, kind of a one-level long structure, as it happens, in Martinez, and kind of a part of the rural area of Martinez. And it's not a very built-up area at all. And they were reporting a variety of different phenomena or experiences that they were having in this home. And they did tell me that they didn't know what it was, but it felt like, they thought the place was haunted in that way, and they couldn't figure out why.
Okay. So what kinds of phenomena were they reporting?
So there were spots in the house, one in particular, one room, just the room itself and just this one spot especially, where people, whether it was the family members, there's 4 of them, whether they would feel there was something wrong with the spot. They would feel dizzy sometimes, get headaches in this area. People visiting them, same thing. They would go into that room. They'd want to leave the room right away. It just felt wrong.
So it wasn't just family members. It was visitors too.
Right. So that particular thing was being experienced by visitors. There were a couple other things also being experienced by visitors once in a while. But this was pretty consistent. This was one of the only, almost all the time kind of phenomena that was happening. They also reported In other instances, they would get headaches for no apparent cause. And it wouldn't just be one of them. It'd be, all four of them would start just getting headaches. They couldn't figure out why. They all reported occasionally seeing shadows out of the corners of their eyes. They all reported that there were these occasional noxious odors floating through the house. And it wasn't like just one spot. It was kind of moving around, or they'd get it in different spots altogether. There would be occasional sparks, kind of the spark that you get with static electricity when you touch a doorknob. But this was happening in midair. They could see these flashes of light and sparks actually just popping up all together. They would occasionally, and this was the thing that was most concerning to them, would see balls of fire, little small fireballs appear out of nowhere in midair, and every once in a while would be against the wall. So there were scorch marks on the floor, on appliances, just occasionally, and pretty rare, usually coinciding with some of the noxious odors that they actually experienced as well. There was one other thing that was kind of odd. On the property also was a barn that their landlord had, and this was a non-paranormal complaint, or maybe they thought it was connected, which is kind of interesting. But there were people apparently, not that they ever saw them because this was late at night, coming and going at all hours, and sometimes putting on loud music and just being very active, making a lot of noise in the barn. And that worried them a little bit too.
Okay. So they thought it was connected, like maybe there's a group of people out in the barn and they're casting spells or doing something weird.
Yeah. They never said that to me, but that's the impression I actually got. Yeah.
Okay. Now, you mentioned the owner of the property that I guess they were leasing from. Who was that?
He was an architecture professor at a local university. And they did, report a list to him. And he basically said, I just built that house. I designed it and built it. You folks are nuts. You can't get out. It was a 2-year lease. They didn't want to stay there. He would not let them out of their lease.
Okay. So he basically laughed them off.
Pretty much. Yeah. He thought they were just simply trying to come up with an excuse to get out of the lease for whatever reason. Yeah.
Okay. Well, these are some pretty intense sounding phenomena. I mean, it sounds kind of something like out of a horror movie if you've got fireballs appearing in your house and they're leaving scorch marks on things. I can understand why they might worry that this was some kind of intense haunting situation. Did they try to contact any paranormal investigators before they contacted you?
Well, this was in the late 1980s. Mm-hmm. We were it. There wasn't like, but first of all, the web wasn't in existence. You couldn't go online. And yeah, there were people listed in the phone book as parapsychologists, but for the most part, other than the Office of Paranormal Investigations, which was listed, I made sure we were in the yellow pages. But there were only psychics listed as parapsychologists in the yellow pages. And they called a couple of them and basically got no results. So they ended up calling. And I'm not quite sure, I never asked them why no one ever suggested, or they never thought of John F. Kennedy University, other than it was such a small university. They called Stanford University. They called University of California, Berkeley. They called University of California, Davis. They called San Francisco State. They called a bunch of other major universities in the Bay Area. And each time they were funneled to the psychology department, because there is no parapsychology department at any of those schools. And whoever they spoke to told them, after hearing the stories, told them that they should come in for psychological testing.
Okay, so no investigation of the phenomena, just go see a psychiatrist.
Not even any interest in trying to explain what was happening to them, just that they first needed to come in for psych testing.
Okay, even though it was also a family of 4 and not just one person experiencing stuff.
Right,
I mean, you'd think if it's just one person, it might be mental illness, but a whole family of 4, that's less likely.
Well, that's one of the things I actually asked them. When you had these conversations, did you tell them that it was all 4 of you were experiencing that? And then occasionally visitors would have other experiences too. And the guy said, yeah, his wife just nodded her head too. It's like, yeah, we told them. But they still told us that, he said the psych testing piece made him feel like they were saying they were crazy, and they didn't want to be dealt with.
I understand they also contacted a skeptics group. Did they offer them any help?
Yeah. And believe me, when I knew people in that group, and later on I kind of called a friend of mine who was not the person who took the call, but they called someone from the Bay Area Skeptics. They reached someone at the Bay Area Skeptics, and that person basically did tell them that they were psychologically disturbed and they needed some serious help at that point. After the fact, I told my friend who was more of a skeptic, but still connected to that group. And he pretty much, from what he told me, he made sure that the person who took that call knew better for next time around.
Okay.
Because it turned out he was very interested in, he said I should have called him because he would have come with us.
So they tried to reach quite a number of people. They made a whole bunch of calls.
Yeah.
And that indicates they were pretty motivated. And of course, if you've got fireballs appearing in your house, leaving scorch marks, that's pretty motivating. But they could have been motivated by something else. One of the things that I know sometimes comes up in the more dramatic sounding cases is the person maybe looking for a book or movie deal, and they're trying to get sign off by a paranormal investigator of, yeah, something paranormal is happening here, that they could then take to an agent and say, see, ooh, we've got endorsement from a professional. Mm-hmm. Take our proposal more seriously. So this is sounding a bit like a horror movie. Did you sense that they might have had an ulterior motive, like wanting a book deal or a movie deal or something?
Not that ulterior motive. The only motive they had was getting out of that house and not losing money because of the lease that they had. They just wanted that. Back in the 80s, there were some people who were motivated by that, but again,
like the Lutzes.
Yeah, like the Lutzes, but it was pretty rare unless someone suggested it to them. So, for example, in many of the cases where we did hear that the families wanted a film, a TV show, or something like that, it was the investigators who suggested it to the family, not the other way around. And in some respects, it was the so-called investigators who promoted that because they had the contacts, like the Warrens, and that's where the movie came on. Yeah. Okay.
So, even with the motive being we want out of this lease, there's still a possibility for fraud there. I mean, they could report we saw fireballs when they didn't, and they could take a cigarette lighter to the wall and make little scorch marks and stuff. But you ended up doing an investigation.
We did, and I do want to say that it's very unlikely that somebody who has that kind of motivation is going to call the police. I was surprised they didn't call the fire department. I actually asked them why they didn't think of that. And they just didn't think of it, is what I was told. Fireballs, that makes sense to call the fire department first. But I did not at all get that impression they were interested in even telling anybody about it anyone who hadn't experienced something there. They just wanted out of the lease, and they did kind of want to make sure nobody else was going to live in that house until things were fixed up.
Mm-hmm. So that's a good point about if you're in the midst of committing fraud, you probably don't want to call the police for help. But, there are some stupid criminals. They make shows about them. Yeah.
I mean, if they called the police and it turned out to be fraud and the whole point was to try to get out of their lease, there would be legal action taken by the landlord and possibly by the police too. So it really is. There are stupid criminals out there. There are stupid people out there, as we know.
Yeah. So you ended up doing an investigation, and I know one of the things you stress in your courses is never go alone.
Right.
So, I'm going to ask, how many folks did you have on your team? But before then, why the never go alone principle? That's something I think the audience would be interested in.
Well, the main reason never to go alone, honestly, is safety. And it has nothing to do with the paranormal. It has to do with living people and physical conditions. If you go alone, and before I learned this lesson, I did go on a couple of cases in the early 80s, and they turned out not to be paranormal at all. They were related to domestic issues. And in one instance, in both instances, the husbands were alcoholics and were drunk, came home drunk. One of them was there when I got there. and he was, and there was a domestic abuse issue that she was deflecting to poltergeist activity. And another, same kind of thing. In both instances, there were guns seen. Let's put it that way. So, I learned very clearly never to go alone in that circumstance. In another circumstance, one of my folks went to a home of a woman, her son, her husband had died, I think about a year and a half before, because again, the woman in this case was saying that her, I think it was 10-year-old was acting weird, was possessed or something to that effect. And this individual investigator for me lived about 2 blocks from these people. So she went over there. I mean, this was not even going to be a necessarily formal investigation, but she had worked at a psychiatric facility for adolescents, and she knew she needed to keep a record of everything. So she set up a video camera and had the door open when she interviewed the boy, interviewed the woman, and came to the conclusion the woman was really in intense grief, and the kid had stepped up to become the man of the house. I mean, in other words, he had become overnight mature in order to help his mom. And that was the thing that indicated to her that he was possessed, that he was not acting normal.
He's got a demon of responsibility.
I mean, it's amazing this kid took on that kind of responsibility for his mother. But the next day, a sheriff's deputy comes to Barbara's door and says she's levied a complaint against you that you molested her son. And then the deputy what I was told, the deputy puts up her hand. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. This is not the first time she's made crazy complaints since her husband died. You have anything like notes or anything we can use? And Barbara said, well, I got better than that. I got video. So I think there was an issue afterwards where the boy was taken by Child Protective Services for a short time while she was being looked at. So it's very important to consider having backup for yourself in some way, shape, or form, and also to know when to leave, even if you think there's something paranormal going on. If it's the normal people, the living people that are concerning, just get out of there. If the location is unsafe, structurally unsound, if you notice black mold or something like that, it's not healthy. You want to get them out of there too. But, one of the reasons why I don't ever investigate abandoned buildings, which people seem to think are haunted all the time because they look spooky, is for safety reasons. And because there's never or rarely ever any reports, certainly no recent reports in an abandoned building that something is going on there. You got no witnesses that are there.
In one of the cases you just mentioned, you said that there was a woman who had an alcoholic husband and she was deflecting into poltergeist activity. Does that mean that she was subconsciously, we've talked about the recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis theory of poltergeist before on the show. Was that what was happening, or did you mean something different?
It's possible some of the bruising that she had, because I've seen this happen with people kind of affecting themselves because of the PK. I suspected it was not. I suspected it was the husband. And I don't know if she, at the time, I didn't know if I talked to one of the faculty members I worked with who was a psychologist also, who thought that maybe this was a way for her to to assign blame without blaming her husband, to kind of get some attention in the situation. Although I don't know what she thought the outcome was going to be once in this circumstance. But if there was PK activity going on, there was also the other.
Okay. So how many people did you have on your team when you went to the house in Martinez?
My recollection, well, I can tell you that there were 4 others. Might have been 5 others, but 4 others for sure. Yeah.
Okay. So 5 or 6 people total.
Yeah. And that was partly, honestly, it was partly because I still had students. So I still had grad students. So one of the grad students, Kathy Dalton, brought her husband, Doug, who was an engineer. And then we had a couple of others. And when there was a group of 4 people, I also thought we might have an opportunity to separate them and do interviews separately. So having more people made a lot of sense in that circumstance. But the reality is that, I try not to in any of my cases, I've tried not to bring too many people to overwhelm a family or overwhelm it. Certainly would not bring in 4 people, extra people besides me for a single person investigation if there was only one person living in the house. I might bring 2 others, but I try not to overwhelm them unless I'm going to leave the other people outside to look at look around the structure kind of thing. It's really important, I think, that we make people feel comfortable, and you don't want to descend on them. Although apparently people are wanting the TV cameras to descend on them these days, which is back to your motive as well.
So when you got to the house, what did you all see? I understand you noticed some stuff before you even entered the structure.
Yeah. So the first thing we noticed, which one of the tools of the trade, of course, is an EMF meter. The first thing we all noticed, is it's kind of hard not to notice. There were high tension wires running right over the house. So there's a tower, and then the wires, and there was another tower. There was a hill behind the house as well. And we drove right past the barn, which was really down the driveway a little bit. So just for giggles, I said, well, we're not going to be using our EMF meters. Let's turn them on and see what happens. And they just topped out because of all the electromagnetic field put out by the towers. Also noticed that there was kind of a couple of different sounds in the background that seemed to be coming from the wiring from the towers, the lines. One was a slightly high-pitched sound. The other was a very low-pitched hum that was coming as well. So those were noticed. There was something else about the house that didn't quite look right that Doug confirmed afterwards. We went back outside to look after we went into that room. But it was there were no houses like in the immediate area. It was a pretty open plot of land with that hill right behind.
Okay. So then you go into the house and you meet the family. Did you see physical evidence of the stuff they were talking about? Like, did you see the scorch marks they mentioned?
Oh, yeah. We definitely saw the scorch marks. Yeah. Saw the scorch marks on the wall. They hadn't painted over them. And they hadn't buffed them out of the appliances either. Especially there was a couple on the edges of the stove in a really odd place on the enamel, and in a couple of other places as well. We were also told a little bit about the house itself. It hadn't been built too long before, and a lot of it was concrete block. The kind of stuff you buy at a a lumber place, which is not uncommon for above ground foundations, which we often see here in California. There's very few places that have basements, for example, something I miss from the East Coast. And the guy, the husband said, when we moved in, we were told the house had very unusual, new insulation. And the owner had explained to them that he was, there was a professor at the university and trying something out. And he was he pumped liquid styrofoam in the holes in the concrete block, which would act as an insulator to some extent. I mean, it wouldn't act as a great insulator because you still have the concrete block, which itself gets cold to some extent.
Fortunately, it doesn't get too cold in California.
Out where I'm not too far from where this house was, and it can dip down to the mid-20s in the wintertime.
Okay.
So it can get cold. Usually it doesn't get that cold, but it gets cold and gets hot here in the valley that we're in outside of San Francisco.
Okay. Now, the family also reported some more subjective type experiences like dizziness and headaches and noxious smells and stuff. And at least some of those they reported had also been experienced by friends of theirs who were visitors to the house. Did you and your team experience any of those things?
We did. We walked through the house and walked into this one room, which was kind of like a study, if you want to call it that. It was an extra bedroom that had been turned into, had some books on shelves and a TV, that kind of thing. And it didn't quite feel right. After a couple of minutes being there, I started getting a little headache, and there was a spot, if you stood in this one spot, you did start feeling dizzy if you looked around the room. If you closed your eyes, it wasn't so bad, but it just seemed to be that, which was kind of a giveaway in some respects.
Did you see any fireballs while you were there?
No fireballs, no noxious odors at the time at all, no sparks.
Okay. So we do at least have confirmation of many of the things that the family was reporting. And so now the question would be, as part of a paranormal investigation, what could explain them? What could explain the different things that the people were experiencing? As you stress in your classes, and as I often point out on Mysterious World, we begin by considering whether a reported phenomenon could have a natural cause. And you've noted in classes that I've taken from you that it's common, even when something paranormal is happening, that there are also reported phenomena that have purely natural causes. Because once you think there's a ghost in your house, you tend to attribute everything to the ghost, even if it has a normal cause. So let's take a look at what was reported in this case. One of the things that leaps out at me as possibly having a natural cause was the people in the barn. They could have been there just partying at night or something and not casting spells or summoning demons or ghosts or anything. What did they end up learning about them?
They were architecture students who are either coming to work. Supposedly they were coming to work. After these were grad students who had other jobs, and they'd come late at night and take advantage of this one space the guy had set up for them, the professor had set up for them on his property. And or they were coming to party. I never found out, which one that, or was a combination of those two things. But, honestly, the idea that they were casting spells or anything like that never entered my mind or the mind of anybody with me. We just basically said, look, you got to really talk to and complain to the owner about that. I know you've asked who they were or what was going on there, but you need to complain. And the owner needs to do something about that, at least.
Okay. So let's then focus on the stuff that was going on with the house itself. Did you find anything that could have been a natural cause for the weird feelings that people would have in certain rooms of the house or parts of rooms, or the dizziness or the headaches, that kind of stuff?
So, in that one study room, there were a couple other spots as well, but in that one room, there was a window, and and the window, for whatever reason, which is right near the spot you felt dizzy, just looked a little off to me. So I had a couple tools with me, which I often bring with me just to check on things. I had a carpenter's level and a protractor, and put the carpenter's level on the floor. It's not exactly level in that spot. Good part of the room looks like it's level, but that one spot's a little bit off. The floor is a little bit off. Doug goes outside under that window. He's looking at the foundation, and he had a lot of experience in all sorts of civil engineering and other kinds of engineering. And he comes back in and says, yeah, it's slightly off the foundation there, and it's directly under the window. The protractor showed that the window was not 90 degrees. The doorway was not 90 degrees. Things were slightly angular, and even though our perception automatically makes those things correct 90 degrees, we have autocorrect in our heads in some respects. But there's a conflict then between what you're seeing and what you think you're seeing, and that can cause headaches. It can cause dizziness and other things as well. Good example around the country would be there still are a few, more than just the one in Santa Cruz, California. There are mystery spots. They're called various things. And they use optical principles to make people think that one person's shorter than the other, and they switch places, and that switches. There's water supposedly moving uphill, all sorts of things. But some of those spots, some of the optical illusions, if you stand in them for too long, you will get dizzy, you will get a headache, because there's that mental conflict that you actually have. So that was the first piece of it.
Now, and these were all the spots in the house where there was reported dizziness. There was this kind of phenomena.
There was that kind of, this was the worst offender, was where people were feeling dizzy, not just feeling wrong. And honestly, I think the wrong feeling might have been that in the moment they felt something was wrong, they might have got that noxious odor, or something else was going on too.
Okay. Do you think, since the house was right under these high tension lines, and you said you could hear these sounds coming from the high tension lines when you were outside, do you think that could have been playing a role in this kind of experience as well?
Well, yes. First of all, for some people, high pitched sounds can cause a headache if you hear them. It just really depends. But more importantly, it was that low hum. And by using just a simple vibration detector, was basically a glass of water. I mean, Jell-O would have been better, honestly. But you could see the ripples that were coming. There has been research and had been research for quite some time that low frequency sound could actually cause people to feel anxious. In fact, in some film soundtracks, one example is John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness. There's low frequency sound whenever the evil guy is around, and the weirdest thing is watching that on TV and suddenly getting really tense as you're watching this tense movie, and it cuts to commercial. It's like, and then it comes back on, and you feel tense again. So there's an effect on our body, and another explanation I can give for this is, because this has happened to everybody, you're driving along and somebody pulls up next to you, and they have huge woofers, subwoofers in there, and their car is shaking, and now your car is shaking, and you're shaking. Because the low frequency sound, the bass is affecting you. At 18 and 19 hertz, that frequency, our eyeballs, the liquid matter of our eyeballs, the viscous matter, vibrates a little bit. And you will see short shadows out of the corner of your eyes as well.
That was the next thing I was going to ask about, which is they said they reported shadows out of the corner of their eyes. What did these shadows look like? Did they look like anything in particular?
Just fleeting shadows. They're just fleeting shadows that are there. I've experienced it. The other time that people experience it is if you're really tired and your eyes start kind of moving a little bit. That's when you'll experience that also. And it's just like you're seeing something out of the corner of your eye. You don't know what it is. It could be a shadow. It could be a person. It could be a cat. It could be a dog. There's nothing there. And it's nothing paranormal. It is a result of the shakiness of the matter of your eye.
And you used a glass of water to test for those vibrations. So
test that there were vibrations, right? I did not have anything that would tell me that it was specifically 19 or 18 hertz, but there were vibrations that were actually going on. Yeah.
So it looked like there's a plausible explanation, even though more could have been done to confirm it. There was a plausible explanation for contributions to the dizziness and the headaches and the shadows out of the corner of your eyes and stuff like that.
Yeah, this is pre cell phone with apps, so didn't even have apps to check those kinds of things.
Yeah. Now, the family also reported sparks and flashes of light appearing in the air. So not just like when it's, winter and you touch a doorknob and get a shock, but they would see a spark in the middle of the air. Did you find any explanation for those? Well,
there were two clues. Number one was the high tension wires, and number two was the styrofoam that we were told about, because styrofoam does actually help enhance the static environment. Doug, bringing, again, I brought a carpenter's level and a protractor. Doug brought a 2-foot long fluorescent light tube. Very simple static electricity detector, wave it around, which he did, and it lit up.
So it's not even plugged into anything. He's just waving it.
Not any plugged in anywhere. This is one of the coolest magic tricks. If you're in a high static environment and you wave around a fluorescent light tube, it will often light up. Typically, it will light up. So that kind of indicated, well, we have static electricity. So those sparks were likely sparks of static electricity. And that was, again, very dry air, because this was not in the rainy season here in the Bay Area, not in the winter. And it with the high tension wires and the styrofoam made perfect sense. And the confirmation was the fluorescent light tube, the static detector.
And people are concerned in many places about living in such close proximity to high tension lines.
Yeah.
And I know there have even been lawsuits.
There have been lawsuits for over 40 years, mainly cancer clusters in areas where there are high tension wires. Typically the utilities companies either settle or they fight them until people are too tired. There have been a few cases where people have won. The general, what I found that might be what's going on is that people who have a genetic predisposition to particular types of cancer, the high electromagnetic field may trigger that, but it won't do that to people who don't have that genetic predisposition as well. So it's not healthy. Let's put it that way. It's not a healthy thing anyway to be that close to that kind of proximity all the time. It's okay a little while, but not a good place to build the house. If they built it like another 100 feet or 200 feet away, because you have the property, probably would have been fine.
Okay. So the next reported phenomenon on the list is the noxious odors that the family thought were floating through the house. Did you find out anything about those?
So I had a suspicion because I had one of the folks I worked with had a case that combined noxious odors and fireballs in Silicon Valley. So we go outside, and I sent one of the students to the top of that not so high hill, and to tell me what's on the other side of the hill. Now, my suspicion was not what was on the other side of the hill, but I wanted to know what's in the area. Okay. And it was the Martinez landfill. So that other situation that I mentioned that one of the folks I worked with had experienced, it turned out that this couple was reporting bursts of fire coming out from the ground, and they would smell these noxious odors. And it turned out, as they did a little digging where some of the fires were, that the previous owner had buried garbage in the backyard. And as the garbage,
decayed,
fell apart, and there was methane gas taping up, and all you need is a little bit of static electricity to start that on fire.
Okay, so the noxious odors were caused by methane, it appears, from the landfill.
Methane from the landfill, and then the static electricity, the static environment would occasionally, if there was enough methane, I guess, in a particular area, would catch that on fire.
And then that would cause the scorch marks.
Right.
So basically the methane causes the noxious odors, the sparks combine with the methane to produce the fireballs, and the fireballs cause the scorch marks. It also strikes me that the methane could also help explain the dizziness and the headaches.
Yeah, that is entirely possible. They would have noticed, though, and they did mention that occasionally when they smelled the noxious odors, they would feel a little dizzy or get headaches. But in that one room, they did not have any of that experience. And actually, while we were there, when I was experiencing what I was experiencing in that one room, had nothing to do with any noxious odors or methane. I mean, there might have been some methane in the air, but certainly not enough that we would even smell it.
So we've kind of been through what the family was reporting, and it looks like there are plausible natural explanations for all of it. Did you find anything in this case that was paranormal?
Just their assumptions. Yeah. When we do investigations, as you mentioned earlier, we try to look at each reported event or type of event and find normal explanations for them. Even in the best cases, or many of the best cases where there's real activity, whether it's apparition, haunting, or poltergeist, there's going to be something. There's always something that people have because they've gotten freaked out. They're feeling anxious. There's something about what's going on that they make an assumption, something they didn't notice before, something like a picture falls off the wall. It just really, something falls down off a shelf. It just could have been because somebody bumped it from the other side of the wall. But because they had a real experience, or may have had a real experience, they will start assuming that all that stuff is included. We have to look at it this way because we want to study or try to figure out what's actually going on from a psychic or paranormal perspective. And unless you eliminate all that other stuff, the same thing we do in the laboratory, you got to eliminate all the other possibilities, all the other things that might have explanation. And then you can figure out what's really going on.
How often does it happen when you actually investigate a case that, or even when you just hear about one, if someone calls you for a consultation, how often does it happen that you find that it looks like all of the stuff that's being reported is natural or normal causation, and there's really nothing paranormal going on here?
It doesn't happen when there's multiple different things going on, but if there's a singular thing. So, for example, one of the things that sticks in my mind really well is when back in the early 80s, when I was living in New York and working at the American Society for Psychical Research, I was a guest, a regular guest, actually, on a radio show on Sunday nights called The Edge of Reality, late Sunday nights on WNBC radio. So it was a major AM show. And we got a call one evening from a woman who said, that she has these weird lights that appear, that kind of move through her downstairs. She'll be coming down the stairs and seeing these weird lights like on the wall and just moving around. That doesn't sound like something paranormal that we would think. It sounds more like a UFO thing than anything else, right? Maybe something from Captain Scarlet to call back to.
And the Mysterians, yeah.
The Mysterons, yeah. With something I was green, I would have said, "Oh, you got Mysterons coming after you." So the one thing that just occurred to me right off the bat, as Lee Spiegel is interviewing this woman, I said to her, "So, are there windows opposite where this, the lights are?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Are your shades up?" She said, "Yes." I said, "And are there cars coming down the street?" And she said, "I don't know." I said, "All right, you're on the phone right now. While we're talking to you, just let us know if you see the lights. And if you see the light, run over the window and look out the window, or call us back, and we'll take your call." So a few minutes later, she called back. She said, "Okay, it was car lights." So reflecting off of something else. So I get the things like that in talking to people, I can often over the phone, when it's a singular type of thing or it's a couple of things, I can usually come up with an explanation for them to check, by the way. I don't assume that it's not paranormal, but I do want them to check. Here's what you need to check, and then let me know if that's what the explanation is. And I don't think you're stupid or anything like that. It's just that these are things that people would never think to look for. That is my job to look for. That's the biggest difference that we've got. So it happens every once in a while. And then it also happens when people are talking with things beyond some of their cases. There are things that they tell me about that I can explain to them, again, to check before we come out there. So it's very important for us to get the non-paranormal out of the way. So if there is any potential paranormal activity, we can really dig into that.
Once you do an on-site investigation, is it common or uncommon to have it all turn out to be natural?
It's pretty uncommon for all of it to be natural, because honestly, with a good pre-interview before going out there, you can pretty much, someone who's knowledgeable about the phenomena and the patterns that it experiences and alternative explanations, honestly, you can pretty much determine that there's not going to be something truly paranormal there. I mean, sometimes they may have had a psychic experience that they've expanded into something more ghostly in some way, shape, or form, and that has happened. But they had a genuine experience that does fit some other kind of psychic experience.
Okay. So to kind of hook it back into the case in Martinez, you've now investigated the situation and you found plausible natural explanations for everything that the family has reported, and you share your results with them. How did they react?
They were relieved, but what are we going to do about getting out? We don't want to live here anymore. So first of all, Doug had, I don't remember, I think it was like 12 to 15 zoning violations that he discovered, that he came up with.
He's the engineer.
He's the engineer, and he knew quite a bit about this stuff. So he gave him a list of that. We and detailed everything, all the explanations for things. And basically, I said to them, this is not a safe environment for you to continue living. You need to call the landlord and say, you need to be let out of your lease because this is not a safe environment to be living in. This house is not built correctly, or things need to be fixed, like the foundation piece, but at the very least, it's not a good environment. Methane gas seeping up, all that stuff. So that was, and my suggestion honestly was, and read to him these potential zoning violations. And if he pushes back at all, tell him you're going to report him to the county. And the guy says, so we'll get out of our lease. I said, I want you to ask for all your back. You've only been there 4 months. You need to get all that money back too. Any security deposit, especially, get it all back. Or you may have to take him to court also.
So did they try that? And what were the results?
Yes. They got out of their lease. They got all their money back. After they started reading the zoning violations and telling him all the problems, he was quick to, I'll get everything fixed. I promise I'll get everything fixed, and I'll get you all your money back. I know you want to leave as soon as possible. Just go ahead and, find someplace else. And as soon as you do, you can move out, kind of thing. Okay.
Now, that solved this family's problem, but this is a rental property, and he's going to want to move someone else in afterwards. I can understand not reporting him until you're out and you got your money back, but did they end up reporting him later on for the sake of the next family?
They did.
Okay.
Yeah. He may have fixed stuff up. I think it was a little over a month after they actually moved out, maybe in two months after that they reported to the county what had gone on there. And again, they couldn't do anything about the high tension wire. So it really was going to be up to people. That was not going to be fixed in terms of the low frequency sound, high frequency sound. That was not going to be fixed. They would have had to put in a concrete slab floor or ground, instead of just the ground directly underneath the flooring. They would have actually had to block any potential for methane gas to seep up. But even then, that might have been a problem. And the guy would have had to disclose all that because of our disclosure laws in California as well. It would be on record with the county in any event.
Yeah, it just seems like this is not a good location for this house, because you can't do anything about the power lines. You can't do anything about the garbage dump. You can't do anything about the styrofoam that you've already pumped into the walls because it's cement blocks. I mean, you'd have to tear it apart block by block and replace it all. It seems to me, if I were the architecture professor, the simplest thing to do would be tear this thing down and build elsewhere.
Yeah. And I'm not sure. I never followed that up with that. I mean, technically, they could have put some other kinds of insulator inside to cut back on the static, but that would have been really difficult because that would have cut off some of the square footage also.
Okay. So let's take a step back and look at some of the broader issues that could be drawn from this case. What do you think we can learn from this experience?
First thing I can say, which is really interesting, is when I've done several lectures at the Institute of Noetic Sciences over the years. Usually
that was an organization founded by former astronaut Edgar Mitchell, and it does parapsychological research.
Right. And consciousness research. And Dean Radin is one of the heads of research, and he's been there for quite some time.
I mentioned Dean Radin recently on Mysterious World in an episode on the telepathy tape, so the listeners will be familiar with him.
Sure. And Dean's one of our leading researchers also in general. Dean was present at the time when I was giving a general lecture about doing investigations. And this was to a group that folks who were visiting ions. I think they were donors at the time. And I did talk about this case. And Dean remarked something really interesting. He said, if people ever think that parapsychological investigators, paranormal investigators have no practical use in the world, this case, above anything else, shows that this is a viable thing for us to be doing. And he was actually right. I think that if you're approaching a case with this idea that we need to eliminate the normal, the natural, I got to tell you, I've sent people to had them call their electricians. I've had them call plumbers. I've had them call building people. I mean, over the years, because not because of the paranormal stuff in the cases, but because of the other stuff in the case, that they need to fix these things in their homes. And I know other people who have noticed black mold and said, you need to move now for your health or have that remediated. So the thing that's different about what we do versus those psychologists who say, come in and be counseled or deal with the experiences that way, or even going to see a psychic, we're on site. We notice things. And that can lead to remedies that have nothing to do with the paranormal. In addition to that, there was a survey done, I think 3 years ago now, by a realty company, because during the lockdown, realtors were hearing from some of their clients, a lot of them. In fact, there was a huge upswing in reports of their homes being haunted. And the realtors, knowing the properties from the survey and even looking into it afterwards, they knew very well what was going on. And what they said was, people were locked in their homes for weeks on end. They had never been there 24 hours a day and never noticed all the things your house does. by itself perfectly naturally, and they had almost everything had that explanation. They could actually pin down those explanations. People just don't know, and if they're not exposed to it or don't look for alternative explanations. So it really is important as part of the process. We are not debunking cases. We are looking for explanations, including paranormal ones.
One of the things that I'm particularly impressed by with this case, and it's one of the reasons that I wanted to cover this on Mysterious World, is it illustrates what a good paranormal investigator will do, because there's this idea that people have that, oh, paranormal investigators are just ghost happy and they're going to have every little creak as a ghost. And this illustrates, no, a quality paranormal investigator will actually come in and look at a bunch of stuff that sounds like it's out of a horror movie with fireballs and scorch marks, and you end up saying, nah, it's all natural. And I think that's really to your credit and the credit of your team that you uncovered all that, and then were willing to say it rather than attribute it all to ghosts or demons or something.
Well, and I think it's really important. I mean, frankly, this was a cooler case than many of my paranormal cases. It was much more interesting in some respects. I felt like a real detective in this case.
Now, not all paranormal investigators are good ones, though. And there are the TV ghost hunter people and so forth who think all kinds of stuff is paranormal that has perfectly natural explanations. So you kind of got to be selective about who you're using for a consultation in a situation like this. Would you agree?
I would agree. And I'd also say that many of those TV paranormal investigators might know better, but the producers have a show to put on and has nothing to do with coming up with normal explanations most of the time. So it's highly skewed on television. There have been times that certain investigators of talent on the show has been caught faking things for effect. The edits are all for effect. So it's just, there's a lack of education. I mean, you're teaching our Introduction to Parapsychology course for the Rhine Education Center. People need a grounding in the history, in the 142 years since the founding of the Society for Psychical Research. And they did investigations. And then there was the London Ghost Club, which people did investigations even before that. In fact, there were investigators going back as far as a couple thousand years ago. Arthemedorus did one of the first recorded investigations, looking for explanation but finding something paranormal. So it's important for people to know what's gone before. It just seems that because of the TV shows, too many of the people who call themselves ghost hunters or paranormal investigators, they're more interested in mimicking what they see in the show. I mean, you can tell that by the fact that they all wear uniforms practically. They're wearing their T-shirts with logos. They have to have their equipment. They follow a protocol or so-called methodology based on whatever their favorite show happens to be, and they're not all the same. I've gotten complaints from clients who had local ghost hunting groups come in, and they came in some cases, they kick the families out to go to a hotel overnight. They give them the evidence the next day. There's some EVP there. If there's a growl on the EVP, they have demons in their house all of a sudden, and leaving the families or these folks in high and dry when people wanted help or explanation. They didn't get, they got an explanation. They didn't get a good explanation. They were not helped, put it that way. And that's a real problem. In that sense, the expansion or explosion of ghost hunting has caused problems for people. The other side of that is it's also brought people out of the woodwork who never would have admitted their interest before, who are truly interested and curious about what's going on and why. And those are the people we hope to bring back into the field.
Now, we've kind of covered what lessons can be learned for paranormal investigators in this case, but there were also psychologists and skeptics that the family appealed to before they discovered you. Do you think there are lessons here for psychologists and skeptics when considering a case like this?
Absolutely. Part of the problem is, of course, many psychologists don't believe in anything psychic or paranormal. So they're going to go to a diagnosis, and if something sounds crazy, it must be. There is a middle ground here, by the way. As someone trained in magic and mentalism, which is the psychology of deception and perception in some respects, I am very well aware. In fact, that training has kind of helped me enough to notice why sometimes people do make these wrong conclusions. And very often, a wrong conclusion that they make can make them sound psychologically off because they have nowhere to go but this weird explanation. The fact is that it's incredibly rare for a psychologist to go to someone's house to see what the physical environment actually is. And very often the physical environment can lead to some issues that would otherwise be diagnosed as a psychological issue, which are really a perceptual issue. That's psychological, but just one that the psychologist would never be able to see or notice on that.
And they may end up on drugs or, have expensive counseling sessions forever because there's a physical problem at home the psychologist isn't aware of.
That's right. It's really, it's this one big piece, I think, of psychology that's completely left out that we are well aware of because field investigators, field workers go to people's homes. Social workers go to people's homes. So a licensed social worker would notice something the psychologist never would in those circumstances without knowing anything about the paranormal for that matter. So it's really, that's a lesson. The other lesson is don't jump to conclusions. People make mistakes. Somebody who, like all those people from the realty survey, they were making mistakes. They were not, unfortunately, I would guess that a lot of the people who call themselves skeptics, the pseudo-skeptics, would have said, well, there's obviously people were just getting so crazed being in their homes alone that they were imagining all sorts of things. No, they weren't imagining anything. They were mislabeling things. There's a difference.
Do you think there are messages for skeptics that can be learned from the Martinez case specifically, where it wasn't just, I'm hearing noises in my house I'm not used to, but, we've got scorch marks and there are fireballs and noxious smells and our visitors experience the same things we do. And yet the Skeptic Society person they talked to also just said, you need mental help.
Yeah, I think that, and there are skeptics who, when they hear those kinds of things, will go out and help them, but they're going, very often though, they're going in to show, they're not going to consider anything paranormal. So even if something's left over after the normal explanations, they'll still come up with something else. That's the one piece. They have to be truly skeptical, and then they would consult someone else at that point. But when you hear people say that there's a problem, especially when you talk about multiple people, it's important to listen to what they're saying and not jump to those kinds of conclusions. The sad thing is that person who took that call and said that they should go for psych testing, they were probably crazy. He knew me. This is not my friend, but he knew me. He knew us at JFK. He could have referred them over to John F. Kennedy University or to some parapsychologists or other people in the Bay Area that they knew of, and I know that they knew of. Instead, he jumped to well, you people are crazy, you need psych testing.
Have you run into other cases or case reports where someone was told that they might be psychologically disturbed, but it turned out to simply be wrong conclusions like this?
I have over the years, and I've actually taken a couple calls myself. I do tend to listen to people. There's a point, because I'm not a trained psychologist, but there's a point of pathology where, this doesn't fit anything in our field. So I'm going to refer you to someone who is more open to these kinds of things, somebody in transpersonal psychology to talk to them. Or I might refer them, this sounds like more of like a UFO thing. You need to talk to people at MUFON. You're calling the wrong person. If it's Bigfoot in your backyard, you need a cryptozoologist. You don't need me. But I can tell you there was one call that I got years ago, which was really interesting because it did sound like your typical, I get a lot of these kinds of weird calls, and so is everybody in my field. Someone, my neighbor, is using technology or spells to attack me, to psychically attack me. Okay. So in this case, this guy said that one of his neighbors had some sort of devices that were beaming bad energy at him. And whenever he was home, he would get headaches and he'd feel nauseous and he would have to leave the house. And he knew when he confronted his neighbor just told him he was crazy. And I mean, honestly, it sounded disturbed. But he said one important thing as I'm listening to him. He said, yeah, my power bill, my electricity bill has gone up like 500%. I said, wait a minute. He was in a trailer park, or a mobile home park, by the way. I said, you need to call Pacific Gas and Electric. They will come up for free and do a check as to why your power bills have gone up 500%. Here's what I want you to tell them. And I was very careful to tell him not to say anything about the neighbor, not to say anything about, feeling ill or something like that, but just simply focus on the bill. And you think that there's something wrong with the power lines. So they came out. And it turned out that neighbor that he said was attacking him psychically or technologically had tapped into the power lines of 5 mobile units to power all of his devices because the guy was taken away. He was schizophrenic. This mobile home park was near what's called the Blue Cube here in the Bay Area, which is a NASA Ames, probably NSA. It has no windows, lots of satellite dishes. In fact, my friend Doug, who I mentioned, the engineer, worked there, and he couldn't tell us what he did for a living.
There was a building like that when I lived in San Diego, too. Very prominent building downtown, no windows, lots of aerial dishes.
Yeah, so this guy thought the government was spying on him, so he lined his entire mobile home with stereo and other equipment, which was always on. And so he wouldn't have to pay the electric bill. He tapped into other people's power lines. So PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, called the police, had him taken away. The guy they fixed his line. They made sure nothing was coming in. He felt almost immediate relief when they shut the power off on the guy's place next door. This guy was not crazy. He was not psychologically disturbed. He was disturbed, but not psychologically. And it was very likely that it turned out some of the other neighbors were feeling things too. They just didn't go to the paranormal explanation. That what he was experiencing was kind of a bleed off from the sound and from other things, the audio bleed off and the EMF bleed off and all of that was making him sick, more or less.
Okay. So we've covered in this episode a number of different things that are natural that can produce effects that people may interpret as paranormal. But I know there are others. What other kinds of things, if someone thinks something's paranormal, what should they look for? Are there other examples besides what we've covered in this episode?
Well, there are going to be, I've certainly experienced that. There are places that hold memory. We call them hauntings or residual hauntings. Something happened in that spot. And very often it's emotional that you're picking up. So you might pick up that, a really sense of unease or nausea or something else. Depends on how you are reacting. Psychically is affecting your body. You're actually picking something up psychically, some information in the environment of some event that happened there. Could have been recent, could have been many years ago, and you're picking that up and it's kind of playing out through your reactions, generally very emotionally. Those kinds of things, pretty much everyone's going to have some kind of reaction. A lot of folks will just simply dismiss it right off the bat. It's helpful to see, what could possibly be the cause of that. What was the event that could have caused that? It's not always bad. It can be actually very good sometimes, and you can feel certain spots feel really positive because the people who were living there or the activity that was happening was all positive activity. It's just that we typically focus on the negative as well. And that's probably, when we talk about ghostly activity, that's kind of the majority of what is truly paranormal that is happening. It's not conscious spirits. It's stuff in the environment from living people that leave stuff behind. Recordings, emotional, sometimes they're visual, that we pick up visuals of stuff. People have certainly done that at Gettysburg and other places. Sometimes people pick up smells that are not real smells, or they hear things that were, again, this is related to the activity of the living. It doesn't matter if those people are alive or not anymore. It's still a recording of a past event done by humans most of the time.
So a residual haunting would be something that is paranormal, but is interpreted as an apparition of a ghost. What are some things that are not paranormal that could be mistaken as paranormal? Like you mentioned black mold, for example. What are some of the effects that it might have?
So there are certainly medication can have interactions that cause people to feel things, or to even have visual hallucinations. Black mold can cause visual hallucinations. It can also cause some serious respiratory issues. And if you're there too long, it can cause some long-term issues for you as well. That's why mold remediation is very important, but very expensive all the time too. You just have to really be careful about that. Of course, there are foodstuffs that can cause people to have all sorts of unusual experiences, whether it's through mild food allergies, you haven't gone as far as anaphylaxis, or you've eaten something that is hallucinogenic. Technically, nutmeg consumed in enough amount is hallucinogenic. Wouldn't recommend it, but I don't know that you're going to have a fun time. But people do play with things. People do have change or altered perceptions because of interaction between medications that are prescribed to you, between medications prescribed to you and over-the-counter medications, between medications you may be taking and food, because food affects our brain chemistry as well. So all of those things could cause shifts in your state of consciousness and therefore a shift in perception as well.
I know one of your cases involved not simply subjective feelings like shifts in perception and so forth, but people were hearing footsteps in their attic.
Yeah. Well, that's another normal explanation kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about, because this one's fun. Tell me about the footsteps in the attic case.
Yeah. So this was one of the early cases I had in New York when I was working at the ASPR, and I was going out alone. I had nobody else to go with at the time in general. And I was very careful about the cases I chose at that point. And this was a couple in Westchester County that had a house, and the houses there, that's where I grew up, is in Westchester. Many homes had actually attics you could either pull down a ladder, or you actually had an attic stairway to the attic, huge attic. My grandparents had a place like that. And this couple reported that around somewhere between, it was varied a little bit. It was between like 10:50 and 11:10 p.m. They would, if they're in the hallway, which they often were, or their bedroom in the upstairs, they would hear footsteps coming from the attic. So they'd turn on the light in the attic after going up the pull down the stair ladder and go up there, and they can't see anything. And so it wasn't scaring them per se, but it was bothering them that they couldn't figure out what was going on. So I did go. I went late. So I probably started after 8 p.m. We talked for quite a while. I waited till well after 10:30. I went up into the attic. We had gone up there a couple times before. I just settled down. This is possibly one of the only times I've ever sat alone in the dark, because it was, if the light was on, whatever's causing it might be affected. So I found a spot and I settled down after hearing where they thought the footsteps were coming, kind of looking down below and looking above. I sit down, I have a flashlight with me, and I'm just waiting and waiting. And you could see, the attic was not a finished attic, so the roof was slanted, right? So I suddenly hear this scratching sound from across the attic. So if you think of this, it's the long way of the attic, but it's coming from the horizontally directly across, the short end. And I hear this scratching, and I hear a slight thump. And I hear a little scratching and another thump. And this is continuing, and I'm not doing anything. It's coming closer and closer to me, and I hear the guy downstairs right below saying, "Do you hear the footsteps?" Not hearing any footsteps. So it's getting fairly close to me, and I turn on my flashlight, pointing in that direction, and it was a squirrel pushing a nut across this rough attic floor, and it was bouncing, making that little thump. Scared the squirrel. I look around, I see a whole pile of nuts that the squirrel was apparently putting away for the winter. We have a squirrel we feed every day. We feed him peanuts, and every once in a while he'll plant them in my wife's flower pots outside with the plants. So the squirrel goes out. I checked around, also saw the spot, and then I wanted to do an experiment. And, this is one of the things that got people to start saying that I had a little bit of Peter Venkman from Ghostbusters and a little bit of Bill Murray in me. I picked up one of the nuts and I rolled it across the attic floor, and the guy's yelling, "The footsteps, they're going faster." So I picked up a handful of nuts and I threw them across the floor, skidded them across the floor, and the couple starts screaming. Which was a little bit more reaction than I really wanted at the time. Yeah. But I kind of opened the thing going down. I said, it's okay. It's just me. It's just me. And they're looking at me like, are you possessed as I'm coming down? I had to take them up one at a time and show them what was going on. It was the acoustics of the attic. I couldn't tell you what it was about the acoustics, but with the floor, the rough floor, and something about the shape and other things in the attic was funneling this down to make it sound like, it was amplifying it to sound like footsteps. Felt bad for the squirrel. We threw all the nuts out. He fixed the whole, patch up the whole,
Yeah, well, the good thing about squirrels is they don't put all their nuts in one place. So he should have right. He should have other nuts hidden there.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So, is there anything else you'd like the audience to know? Like, is there anything you'd like to pitch?
Yeah. So the stories I've told, these two stories especially, the squirrel and the Martinez case, those are in my book, A Paranormal Casebook, which is in its second edition now, available on Amazon as paperback, Kindle, and even an audiobook these days. I have other books, but there's a lot of really interesting cases in there. There's a couple of others that kind of border on the normal explanation. There's a lot of paranormal explanation cases in that book. In fact, that's the majority of the book that you'll see. And I'm planning on putting out a second volume at some point. It'll be called Another Paranormal Casebook. That's the next title. And then I do have some other books as well. And I'm planning on bringing a couple of my other books back into print. But I have books like ESP Wars, East and West, which is co-authored by Edwin C. May, who was the head of the U.S. Stargate program for 11 years. That's the remote viewing program. And Joe McMoneagle was the #1 viewer, another author on that. It's a history of the remote viewing programs of the United States, and also has contributions by the Russians. What in the world were the Russians and the Soviets doing? So it's the only book that actually covers both sides of the story in some respects, told by insiders that are involved there. I have a book called Psychic Dreaming, which you can find if you are interested at all in dreams and being more psychic in your dreams. That's a really good book as well. And I'll just mention a couple of novels that I co-authored with my friends, Rich Hosick and Arnold Rudnick, both a couple of TV writers, based on something we were trying to sell as a TV series. The first one's called Near Death, A Rainy Day Investigation. And the second is After Life, A Rainy Day Investigation. And we will have a third one out sometime soon, I hope, called Farsight. And these are very loosely based on some of my cases. One of the main characters is also loosely based on me. But it's kind of a skeptic cop who has a near-death experience and a parapsychologist, anthropologist who get together and deal with some really interesting cases. And very much a mystery. Both of them are very much mysteries. So there's more than just ghostly stuff in them, too.
Okay. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, the top of our interview, you also teach classes at the Ryan Education Center. And one of the things about the Ryan Education Center is they have sort of 3 major semesters during the year, but they also have a 1-month 4th semester in August. And I'm sure you're going to be teaching courses for that. The new semester is starting next week. So if people are interested in looking at Lloyd's classes and seeing whether there's something you're interested in, do go to ryanedu.org. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. We'll also have a link to a paranormal casebook. So you can read about the case that we talked about this episode. Lloyd, is there anything else you'd like to mention?
Yeah, stop by my website, www.loydauerbach.com. There's a lot about the books. There's a blog there. There's a resources page if you're trying to contact somebody in parapsychology. All the major organizations and what they offer are listed there. So I have a lot of stuff that's there, which is constantly being built up as well.
You also have a YouTube channel, and you do a regular show on YouTube. Can you tell us about that? Yeah,
I do an every other week Ask Professor Paranormal Q&A, live Q&A. People pop by and they ask me questions, and I answer the questions. It's every other weekend on every other Sunday night. It's 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. You want to go to youtube.com/@AskProfessorParanormal for the link. We have recorded over 50 shows at this point that are there, past shows. If you want to see what it's like, decide whether it's worth your time, and join us live. You'll see the coming dates that'll be. You should see at least the next date after this particular show that's there. Okay. Anything else you'd like to mention, Lloyd? Well, I hope folks actually consider going to the Rhine's Maiden website too, not just Rhine EDU, but Rhine, RHINE.org, and joining the Rhine Center. It is a really good organization. It has a lot to offer to members, including discounts on classes, by the way. So actually, if you take probably 2 or 3 classes, you're going to make up the money you'd spend on that membership. So definitely stop by, see all the resources that are there. Join us, please, and just stay in touch. You know, one of the things I do want to always encourage people to do, and I think I can speak for most of my colleagues, we're open to contact. You know, we like, especially if people are interested in learning, we are all open to contact. People have asked me why I'm doing this Q&A every other week. I'm paying it forward. I mean, I had a lot of mentors and people to talk to in the field when I was just a student, and even before. When I was in high school, I got to talk to a couple of New York area parapsychologists who lived not too far from me. They were giving of their time. People in our field are very happy to help people learn. Well, Lloyd Auerbach, thank you so much for visiting us once again on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Thank you, Jimmy. Good to see you.
Well, Jimmy, that was your interview with Loyd Auerbach about the Hellhouse of Martinez. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we go?
No, just that people should check the show notes for links to all the different resources we mentioned, including Lloyd's A Paranormal Casebook, which describes this case, and his website and YouTube channel, as well as where you can take his classes from the Rhine.
And Jimmy, what's your bottom line about this?
I think the Hellhouse of Martinez, California is a fascinating and important case. It was obviously important to the family to determine that all the phenomena were natural, and this let them get out of their lease and get their money back since the house was unsafe. It also let them protect future residents by reporting the house. The case also was important because it showed the principles that competent paranormal investigators use. They're not a bunch of ghost-happy buffoons who attribute everything to spirits, and they're not afraid to say that everything in a case has a normal, natural explanation if it turns out that's what's happening, which means that they also need to be taken seriously if they say that a case does contain paranormal elements. The case was also important for psychiatric officials and skeptics because it shows that not all reports of strange phenomena are due to mental illness or hoaxes. And finally, I think this is an important case because it shows how paranormal investigators can help people in ways that others don't. So all in all, I think the Hellhouse of Martinez is a fascinating and important case.
Very good. And what further resources can we offer to the listeners and viewers?
We'll have links to Loyd Auerbach's book, A Paranormal Casebook, also his book, ESP Wars, his YouTube channel, his website, also the Rhine Education Center's website and the Rhine Research Center's website, the Society for Psychical Research, the Ghost Club, and information about cancer and power lines.
Now we turn to our mysterious feedback, brought to us by our feedback coordinator, Rob Leonardi. And again, this feedback is from our recent episode on St. Malachy and the prophecy of the popes. The first feedback comes from Never Clever Nor Witty 7821 on YouTube, who writes, I was born and raised Catholic, and this is something that really irks me with humanity's obsessions with prophecies for end times. I don't understand why we Catholics, really all Christians, can't seem to take Jesus at his explicit word in Matthew 24:36. But of that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but the Father alone. I know, I can hear it already. But public revelation versus private revelation. The moment private revelation becomes public discussion, we have a problem. It's no longer private. I have a hard time believing that Jesus would insist to the apostles that no one, not even the human nature of Jesus himself, knows the answer to this. But the Father would choose to give this to some person later in the future? Furthermore, our insistence to pursue that which God said is off limits speaks far more of our anxieties and lack of faith in him. When do we learn to just trust?
Well, I appreciate a lot of what you have to say here, Never Clever nor Witty 7821, but I also would differ on at least a few points. One thing I agree with is we can't predict when the second coming is going to happen, and that's going to be that I would root it in different scripture passages. You cited Matthew 24:36, but if you look at this in context, including with the parallel in Mark 13, it's clear that what Jesus is talking about there is when the Jewish temple is going to be destroyed. That's what he says only the Father knew when he was given this prophecy in AD 33. So he's not talking about when the second coming is going to happen. There's more I could say about that, but that's the essence of that passage's interpretation. I don't think it applies to the second coming. What I do think apply are other passages that indicate that Jesus' return is going to be like a thief in the night. It's going to be unexpected. And I agree with you that if God didn't include that in public revelation, he's unlikely to include it in private revelation later on, the exact timing of it. And so I broadly agree with you, but I'd have a few differences on some matters of detail.
Martin Rourke, 4876 on YouTube writes, "Great episode as always, Jimmy and Dom. Jimmy clearly provides multiple reasons to reject the prophecy as genuine, not least that Pope Leo's ascension to the papacy renders the prophecy outdated. However, I can't help but suspect some set of Acantists might say that the last few popes aren't true popes, so the prophecy could still be alive. Not that I believe that or want to give anyone ideas."
Yeah, I agree, but you know what they say, seat of a Cantist, gonna seat of a Kant.
And now it's time to hear from you. What are your theories about the Hellhouse of Martinez, California, and what happened there? You can let us know by visiting sqpn.com or the Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World Facebook page, sending us an email to feedback@mysterious.fm, sending a tweet to @mys_world, visiting the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/discord, or calling our mysterious feedback line at 619-738-4515. That's 619-738-4515.
And I want to say a special word of thanks to Oasis Studio 7 for the video and animation work on this episode. Check it out by going to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy Akin. And while you're there, be sure and like, comment, and subscribe. And when you subscribe, hit the bell notification so you always get notified when I have a new video. We are working our way towards 200,000 subscribers, and we'd love to have you as part of the gang.
So, Jimmy, what's our next episode going to be about?
Next week, we're going to be looking at one of the most important papers in the history of psychology and parapsychology. Back in 2011, psychologist Daryl Bim released a paper called Feel in the Future, in which he reported the results of 9 experiments he did using standard psychological principles to test whether precognition is real. And the paper rocked the scientific world. So we're going to be telling you all about Feel in the Future and the controversy that followed.
Folks, be sure to follow Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn, your favorite podcast app, or at Jimmy's YouTube channel, where you should hit the bell to get those notifications. Be sure to get your very own Mysterious World t-shirt, mug, and more in our merchandise shop at sqpn.com/merch. You'll find links to Jimmy's resources from our discussion on our show notes at mysterious.fm/376. And remember, to help us continue to produce the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is also brought to you in part by Rosary Army, featuring award-winning Catholic podcasts, rosary resources, videos, and the School of Mary online community, prayer, and learning platform. Learn how to make them, pray them, and give them away while growing in your faith at rosaryarmy.com and schoolofmary.com. And by The Grady Group, a Catholic company bringing financial clarity to their clients across the United States, using safe money options to produce reasonable rates of return for their clients. Learn more at gradygroupinc.com. Until next time, Jimmy Akin, thank you for exploring with us our mysterious world.
Thanks, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World on StarQuest.